Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kaveh Bedi. I am a attorney partner at a firm named Rawls, Gruber and Nice LLP in San Mateo, California. It's my pleasure to have a panel of experts with me to discuss the topic, which is making the right planning decisions early on. My practice generally involves representing contractors and owners in the healthcare sector, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of the people who are in attendance today or have been here before. Let me start by going around and have the panel introduce themselves. I'll start with Mark, if you could start.
Yeah, my name is Mark Montgomery. I'm with WSP. We're a design engineering firm. I've got 23 years of experience in the healthcare industry, designing all sorts of different healthcare facilities and all different delivery models, and been working a few different places in my career, Texas to start with, and then Virginia for a while, and currently located in Denver, Colorado, where I lead our buildings practice for WSP in the Mountain and Southwest region. So,
thank you, Mark. Thanks for being here with us today. Next, I want to go to Amy at Plenary Americas. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Kaveh. My name is Amy Kaznikas, and I'm an assistant vice president in the project delivery department at Plenary Americas. I've been involved in the AFP and P3 industry for 6 years with Plenary. Plenary is a leading P3 developer in North America with 22 P3 healthcare projects and 53 total P3 projects in our portfolio, both in the U.S. and Canada. Specifically in my role, I'm engaged in the pursuit, design and construction, and operations and long-term maintenance phase of our healthcare and other vertical infrastructure projects, specifically in the Canadian space. So I'm really excited to be a part of the panel today. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Thanks for being here and joining our panel today. Last but not least is Matt Tuckner at Sharp Healthcare. Matt, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I am a senior project manager for Sharp Healthcare, which is the largest healthcare provider here in San Diego. I'm actually an architect by trade, so I've been licensed for many, many years. I don't want to date myself too much, but the Twin Towers were still up when I started doing it, so it's been long enough. Sharp's got me basically building projects. Usually building hospitals is my main job, but I do medical office buildings, hospice houses, and some other interesting things on the side for them, which I probably can't always talk about all of them, but building is my game. So.
That's excellent. I think we all have that in common, come from it from different perspective, and it's again, it's a pleasure to have you guys here and for me to moderate this group. As you guys might have seen, the topic we're talking about is what to do, what's the right steps to take, and what are the steps in having the planning session early on in order to get the project started and off to a good start. And I think some of that starts with really thinking about the vision and the goal of the project. And what's involved in coming up with that, and sometimes it's a lot easier said than done, because you sit around and think about it, it's like, oh, we need to have this. But in your experience, and Mark, why don't I start with you as the designer, working for WSP? When somebody comes to you and talks to you about a new project they have in mind, what are some of the things you go through to kind of flesh that out and really make them think about how to get started on a project?
Yeah, well, projects vary quite a bit in their reasons for being, and so you kind of have to start with that. What's the business case? What are we trying to do? Healthcare is a business, and so we need to understand what the driving factor for that project is, if it's a expansion of a OR or something like that. What are we really trying to achieve, and what are some of the boundaries of the project? Sometimes there are already a dollar value that we're trying to work to. Sometimes there's not, and it's we don't know how much it costs. We don't know where it even should go on our campus. Let's kind of start there, and really the questions that I ask right out of the gates was really those business case, or what's the vision of the project. In some cases, it might be speed to market because there's a competitive situation going on there. Sometimes it's, hey, we've got to do something different and new, and we really want to think outside the box on this one. We're hearing and seeing a lot more about resilience, islanding your healthcare facility from utilities if for some reason there's a natural disaster, and how do you handle that? And so some of those conversations need to come up because they are really a driving key to understanding what the next steps are for the execution of the project, and really trying to get to the point where you can start identifying those risks, and maybe those risks are what kind of determine the next steps.
Right. And Matt, I'd like to ask you the same question as well. Since you're the actual sort of owner for a project, what do you guys? How does a new project come about, and how do you define the goals and the vision of a project? Is it based on needs? Is it based on market studies? Is it based on a growth sector of the industry that you want to be in, or is it a combination of all of that? And how do you guys go about?
It is all of that, but as I like to conceive of it, there's it's either coming from the top down or it's coming from the bottom up. So if we look at those maybe two main ways a bill becomes a law, we'll say, does the CEO of Sharp Healthcare have a vision of growing into a different community or starting a new service line, right? Those are the big idea projects that are actually coming from the top down, that then our job is to sort of take the idea and see how it can become a reality in the long run. And then there's the ground up, like the manager of physical therapy in our skilled nursing facility needs to expand, his capabilities, and is looking at this space and can he expand into it, right? So, and the little ones from the ground up don't necessarily have to be small, and the big ones from the CEO don't necessarily have to be gigantic, but I think it comes at you from both directions. And depending on which way it's coming, you still have the ultimate same goal. You're trying to conceive, what do we need to do? What could we possibly do? There is a vision component to this. Just because someone needs a addition to physical therapy, maybe I can help respiratory therapy in the same process by doing it. And in both of those directions, I'm also trying to think, how do I build support for this, right? So building support is raising the money to do it, finding, getting board approval in the end, getting people to buy in that this is the plan we want to do, and to support it as you're going through it, because nothing's worse than, I've come up with this project proposal for this department, but they don't like it anymore and they don't even support it. So now I've done all this legwork and figured this out, and I still don't have a project. I'll probably leave it at there for that question.
Yeah, no, I think are there certain issues or certain topics that you find to be common in terms of crystallizing a vision or a goal? I mean, is it always money or schedule, or is it more based on needs, or does it just vary project by project? And I don't know, Mark or Matt, if you guys, are there common things that you either want to identify early on, or that you see it come up over and over again, that you think you really think about those before you get going?
Money is a common one, definitely. I mean, that's part of building support. If I can't get the funding, if I can't get the board to approve it, if I can't get a VP or someone to support spending the money, then it doesn't tend to go anywhere. I do like to think like my clients are everyone in Sharp Healthcare, though, not just the CEO or the people providing the money. So it becomes part of my job to get the money approved. And there's various ways that's done, through putting in capital proposals, through writing board letters. Like, the ability to write a good board letter is an important thing, because I'm not representing my client well if I can't raise the money. But I like to call it inception. There's the idea that I'm going to sit in a design meeting and the architect's going to get the users to buy in. But really, like, if I kind of know what needs to happen here to get the support, I have to implant the idea in someone's brain and make it grow in there and then come to fruition. And I think inception is the best word you could use to describe that. So, I mean, it's little things. Like, a given example, we wanted our foundation to move from one building to another, and they didn't want to be in the new building. And it's like, they kind of weren't into the idea. And I'm like, well, what if you were on the top floor and you had a private patio and like in 15 seconds? Oh, yeah, I like that. See, it took me all 15 seconds to change your mind. Yeah. Those are the kind of ways you can build support for a project. And a lot of it has to do with creating a vision for it and selling that vision. And you could be selling that to the very users of the project. You could be selling that vision to the board of directors,
Yeah, I mean, those are all, I think getting the project off to a good start is always important and critical, but it's sometimes some of the issues don't arise until you're a little bit into it. I guess I'd like to turn to you, Amy. Are there certain aspects or objectives or in terms of design or revenue or capital or something that you like to look for as part of the upfront scrutiny that you guys go through in order to get the project from the conceptual phase into a more, put pen to paper and get it going?
Yeah, for sure. I think, we like to think of it in a few, broad strokes and broad discussions that can happen definitely very early on that help to get into the right direction, I guess, from a P3 perspective. And so, one thing is risk appetite, right? I think we've talked about this probably a lot throughout the conference, but what's the level of risk that the owner is most comfortable and confident in kind of owning? I think if there's a spectrum of that risk, I think P3 is there's a let's say there's privatization, there's P3 somewhere in the middle, and there's a traditional model. I think having those discussions about where you land in terms of that spectrum helps to further define and explore those models that might be more approachable for that particular project. I think for us, in talking in early stages, I guess, with our clients prior to RFQ or even RFP phase, the scope review is also really important for our owners to understand is like what is best done by the owner versus what's best done by the private sector. And it doesn't necessarily, I think often the inclination is what would I like to do versus what I don't want to do. And I think that's not necessarily the right way to kind of get that conversation going. It has to be the appropriate risk transfer and who is best suited to do that type of work. So I think often we have those types of conversations early on that help to flush out some of the further discussions that happen to be able to decide on a model altogether. I think control and level of control also, that type of discussion it all really intertwines with risk as well, and the scope. It all kind of goes together hand in hand. But it's what is the level of control an owner is willing to give up and to share as part of the process. So if it's kind of something that is close to their heart and they want to be able to do all of and to make all the decisions on it, then from a P3 perspective, that doesn't probably provide the best value for money. But if there's a understanding and a want to go in the direction of a shared controlled methodology where the private sector can really take really be the master of our own destiny to a certain extent in collaboration with our client, I think those types of having those types of discussions have been very helpful in kind of going down this process. And long-term budgeting and long-term goals as well are something for Plenary in particular. We do the design, build, finance, and maintain model, and so that maintain aspect is definitely important to us. And so I think having discussions about what is the capital cost to you today versus what are your goals 10, 20, 30 years from now, I think that's definitely something to think about in terms of which direction you want to go in generally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Amy mentioned a delivery model based on design, build, finance, and maintain. I think you said, and where at what point in time, in terms of early planning, do you guys make the decision on the delivery method, and sort of what drives that? In terms of doing a design build or doing an IPD type of a project, or more of a traditional design, bid, build, or even if it's not a P3, a traditional P3 model, it's more of a you look for a design, build, and then operate and maintain type of a structure. When does that come into play? Let me start with you, Mark. When you're in that early on, and do you get involved with that, and how do you make a decision between all sorts of different delivery models?
Yeah, so as the designer, a lot of times those decisions are made without our input, but as I've kind of observed through my career, there's a few things that maybe lend itself to those decisions. Risk is, like Amy was saying, I've grown to really appreciate the last 5 years of my career, the importance of understanding and identifying that risk, because oftentimes that really, if you're good at that, then you're really going to be able to make the right decisions at the right times, and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. So when you're thinking about what's the best from a risk mitigation perspective of a different delivery model, if you're I don't know about other areas of the country, but I'll use the example here in Colorado. About the last 10 years or so has been very driven on speed to market for ambulatory care centers or these freestanding emergency departments and those sorts of things. So somewhat of a competition play to plant the flag in a growing community to say, hey, I want this to be my place in the community, and be able to funnel some of that work to the larger healthcare system from that outpost, essentially. And in a place like that, you might want to really consider design build. They're not super complex from a design perspective, and speed to market is certainly an important thing, and budget is always an important thing. So maybe a design build type of approach there. I've had successes and failures with all the different delivery models. I'm a big proponent of the IPD model, just because I feel like contractually it aligns everybody to the same common goal better than other contracting methods. And so it gives you the ability to have the accountability in a way that other contract models really can't. And so if you have a trade partner that's maybe needing to be brought along or convinced that they need to step up their game or whatever kind of stuff, it's open and transparent, and everybody can see it in a different kind of, like the traditional CMGC type of contract or something like that. Some of that gets sheltered, and you kind of have suspicions, but some of that stuff where not everybody's aligned can really derail a project if you're not careful. And I've had great success with a CMGC kind of traditional model as well. And the key was that buy-in, that everybody was on board with doing what's best for the project. That's been really key. But I'll use an example of a project that we're doing here recently, where it's a very complex electrical upgrade of a building that parts of it date back to 1920. And so the owner came to a group of engineering firms to say, where do we start? And, we had a selection process that was based on qualifications. Have you done projects like this, that sort of thing? And we were fortunate enough to win the project through that. But it really wasn't very well defined. They were like, our infrastructure is aging. We don't even know where to start. Can you help us with prioritization? Can you help us with this? Because there wasn't a revenue generation component to the project at all. What ended up being a very, very complex engineering feat just to design and be able to figure out how to phase it ended up being just as complex to get the money and the funding and being able to give it in bite-sized pieces to a contractor that they can execute without the owner having to stroke a $10 million check just for infrastructure with no revenue associated with it. That's a hard thing for anybody to ask. And so, taking it in $2 million chunks every year and working through that. And that was a traditional delivery model, but it was very much a very non-traditional way to create that inception of the project. Is we know we've got to do something, we don't even know how to even start, and we need to get somebody on board to help us figure out how to execute it. And so, like I said, it's kind of all shapes and forms, but I think the decision for the actual delivery method, very dependent on your project, on your scope, your scale, your complexity, and your partners. If you got a high level of trust with everybody involved, then frankly, the contract doesn't matter. That's the bottom line.
Right. No, I totally agree. As someone who looks at these contracts and puts them together, I agree with what Mark you're saying and Amy in terms of sharing the risk. I think that's really important. That makes the negotiation much easier, where if one party is not transferring all the risk to the other one, because then the negotiation becomes very difficult, and you don't feel like you're on a team, or you're just being basically dictated to about what to do. And I think the better projects are always the ones that the risk is shared, and it's also an understood expectation of how it's going to be. Then it makes everybody more vested in the overall success of the project, because you have the benefit and the risk being shared, not just a one-way street from the owner down to the contractors or designers, where you feel like you're at risk all the time. So I think, and I agree with you that the cases I see, the ones that are the risk is more evenly spread are the ones that are easier and get done on a more.
Well, we talk about equally spreading risk. I don't know that I completely agree with that. I think the risk needs to go where it's best managed. I mean, that's the thing. You don't put someone in a position to manage risk they're not equipped to manage. And that just goes to the broader, put people in a position to be successful, encourage them to be successful, encourage them to work as a team, and motivate them. Like if they've got a stake in the project, that motivates them to be a part of it. But again, to me, it's also the inspiration. Like, do you care about this project?
Right.
Are you excited about it? Do you want to see it come to its completion?
Yeah. Matt, you raise a really good point. I totally agree with you. It's putting the risk where it's best available to be handled. I agree with you. But you also raise a point about team and importance of having the right team in place. How do you, because I'm a big believer in that too, the cases I've seen. How do you go about putting the right team together and to ensure that the people who actually are going to be involved and going to do the day-to-day can get along and are the right people and have the right vision and attitude for making the project a success? And I guess the corollary question to that would be, and who do you include in this team? And by that I mean, is it just the owner and the designer, or do you bring in the contractor, or do you bring some of the key subcontractors and suppliers? Or what's your experience been in terms of putting the dream team together to build this project?
Well, putting the dream team together, that's a every day, every job event. Unfortunately, it's not something that happens once. It's something that happens continually. So, most of my jobs are design build jobs, and our bid process for that will say sometimes we do progressive design build, but more often it's a more traditional design build. And in progressive, you're aimed a little bit more directly at the team. And then the traditional, you're aimed at the team and the ideas kind of all at once. With progressive, the ideas can come later. As a contractual basis, I'm only requiring necessarily the contractor and the architect to be there on day one when I let them enter the RFP arena. But the deeper the team is, the more success they tend to have, and the further they tend to get in the process, and the more jobs they win. You don't get every individual who's going to be on your team, in that interview, or even on the day you're writing the contract and assigning it, and people come and go. So for me, like it is like, I feel my job is to make sure everyone on the team has what they need to be successful. That's my primary job. Although generally it turns into them bringing the worst problems in the world to me on a daily basis. So whatever makes it up is the hardest stuff to solve. But also, like taking those problems and not getting mad about them, or like, shutting it back in people's faces, but making them feel like that's part of what we do. Like, we solve the problems. Let's figure out how we're going to do it as part of building that team every day. I do say, like, for me, every kickoff meeting on a new project starts with an hours long discussion on our teaming agreement. I want everyone I can get possible to be in that meeting, and everyone to share what they think the teaming agreement needs to say and how it should say it and how we're going to treat each other. I mean, usually you end up with very similar agreements because people want the same things in the end, but it's important that they have that input into it and that their voice is heard. I'm kind of a weird one where I say I like conflict. Like, everyone's like, you got to be nice to each other all day long. Conflict's bad, 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 bad. We do need to be nice to each other. We do need to treat each other with respect. That's part of a team. But conflict is good. I want people in debates with each other. I want to hear them disagree. I want them to disagree with me. Every time I say stuff in a meeting and like everyone's like, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm like, I'm not getting the truth here. I don't have that many good ideas. I say a lot of terrible, terrible ideas. And sometimes I say terrible ones just to see how they land, I want the challenge because that's passion. Like, once someone has fought for their idea against someone else, even if they've lost, like, even if they get shot down in the end, or we don't go that way. They were heard, they're engaged. If their idea does make it through, the pride they have about that idea and the way it carries through the project is invaluable.
Yeah.
So, every day I'm looking for ways to team.
I totally disagree with everything you said just now, but I'm kidding.
I want you on my team.
I'm kidding. Amy, I want to ask you the same question too, since you do a lot of P3 and those projects involve a lot of people coming together for a long period of time to do that. So at the outset, and I mean, Matt again has good points in terms of people coming and going. You don't expect the same person sticking with the same project for a 30-year, lifespan of the project.
Just a note on that too. Like, I was, some know-it-all designer was on a job walk with me saying, like, I was talking about problems we had, and they're like, the key is you have to have the same people from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And I'm telling them, well, my project was just a 5-year project. The one you're about to embark on is 12 years. Like, half of you will be dead by the end of the project. So don't tell me that you're going to retain people from beginning to end. Like, that's just what you're going to deal with. That's reality. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Amy, what do you do? I mean, you're in this too, and you get on a longer term. So what do you do up front to make sure you're getting the right pieces in place?
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to jump off something Matt had said earlier about having someone. You need a project champion, I think, and it works on both sides. But I think the most successful projects we've seen and have had a really strong, enthusiastic, motivated project champion from the owner's side. That's someone who can navigate through any challenges and kind of get through all the political issues. Someone who really believes in what they're doing and the model. And I think this is not so much about what our team brings to the table, but I think it's something that is, in thinking about like an early planning perspective, something that's entirely in the owner's control. So having that key person in place, and it has really shown for us like how successful a project can be when you have that motivation and dedication to really get it done. And I think it really when you, even if that person is not going to be around forever, which I think we know, like, no, we're not going to be on the same project for 30 years. I think having that foundation at the beginning of the project is critical, and then making sure that at all levels of the organization, that the commitment, that dedication and focus on our project goals as a P3 for our example is absolutely critical, because people will change, but that foundation will remain, and I think that part is absolutely one of the key success factors that we've seen in our project experience. And I'm on a project right now where when I think of a project champion, I think of my counterpart at my current project. She's excellent person to deal with. We can be absolutely open. We trust each other. We communicate all the time about the difficult things, the things that are not necessarily happy things all the time, but like everyone's dealing with right now. It's been a tough year with COVID and trying to navigate design and construction in this new world, and having that kind of person on that side, I think has been absolutely so helpful, and her kind of dedication has spread to her whole team, and that's the way that at every level that's how we engage, and that's something that we kind of try and reflect as much as possible on the private sector side as well.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that too. Like that, I don't think you can downplay the COVID factor this year. We'll say, I was talking to a colleague. They're having issues with budget schedule on their project, and I was telling them, like, you got a problem now that you're seeing half of it, but you're not seeing the other half of it. Like you're having schedule problems because of this, because of what we're doing right now. Like we can't be in the room. When I did my last tower, we were all together in the same trailer. Like anyone could find my desk, and like I could go back. Having everyone on site and being able to like be there was a big factor. Design meetings in person were a big factor. We're doing it virtually. We've gotten good at it, but it's still not as good as it was. But that's just like that's the tangible part of it. The intangible part of it is like if we had a great day, we go have a beer afterwards together. Like I talk about, Faye just had a baby and how's that going? And like we were out in the community doing things, giving away turkeys. Like there's these things that are inquantifiable on the job that just haven't been able to happen in the last year. And it means that teaming thing that I'm talking about, you have to work extra hard at it, because a lot of the tools and a lot of the connections that we made have been taken away from us recently. And we have to find new ways to achieve the same objective, and to forgive people for missing this or that, or still make them feel like they're valuable on the team, and not just rate them by what they did for me today,
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing, and it's refreshing to hear, is that it's good to have conflicts on a project, but you also want to be in a project where you can actually freely talk and be able to be heard and then get it resolved. Because if your resolution is, hey, let me call my lawyer, and that's the calls I get, your project is already headed down in the wrong direction, and which is unfortunate, but it's good to hear that conflicts are good, but it's more important to be able to be in a part of a group that you can actually resolve the conflict. Let me ask you guys a couple of things that I see a lot, and I think can be critical in a good project and a successful project, and those are the schedule for a project. I think Mark, you mentioned it early on, like getting it to market, but also permitting requirements on a healthcare facility, which can be very daunting and somewhat of an unknown for any given project for a lot of different reasons. At the outset, what steps do you guys take to ensure the project stays on schedule as much as possible, and also that the permitting process goes through as smooth as possible? And let me start with you, Mark, since you're on the design side and some of that is driven by your work. What do you do to ensure for that success on those two factors?
Yeah, it's a really valid discussion, because it's a challenge on every project, and it seems like more and more these days. Number one is you got to understand the jurisdiction that you're in, and some of them are way more easy to communicate with than others are. All of them are super busy, and so they're stretched for time, and so getting their attention on something to help make some early decisions if there's some reason a interpretation in code or a fork in the road that we'd like their opinion on before it's sitting on their desk with seals on it. That's always the best way to mitigate it. We know where the hot buttons are and where those risks are really. And so the key is to try and eliminate as many of those risks before they're officially in the way. So that's kind of what we try and do from that perspective. But there are certain jurisdictions where it's just really hard, and it doesn't matter how well you prepare for that. Volume of that jurisdiction is always an issue. We've had a big issue with that in Colorado, specifically in the city and county of Denver. Just volume of work in the boom town that it has been in is really a challenge. The state is always seems like to be ever evolving in how they interpret things, and so staying close to them is key. Taking what you're learning from your current project to your next one is super important to try and mitigate that risk as well.
Yeah, Matt,
for us, if it's a really big project, we've probably been conceiving and planning of it for a while. So as I like to say, everything is still people. And I will often be working with the city, trying to bring the project in, bring them in as part of our team, sometimes a year before the thing's out to bid. So one of the things is just being ahead of the problem, but knowing the people is kind of the other half of it. One of the things I've liked about working for Sharp Healthcare is it is regional. So we're in the San Diego area. I have OSHPD as my jurisdiction, and I've got relationships with people there for 20 years now. So I know the plan checkers who are going to be seeing our plans. I know the people in the field who are going to be doing the inspections. I'm talking to them way in advance of what we're thinking about and how they can help and what we need from them, but also knowing what I can legitimately ask them to do and in what time frames, and trying to set that up. So occasionally when I need the favor and have something happen faster than usual, it's a rarity. It's not the everyday ask. City of Chula Vista, where the hospital we just completed is, again, many, many, many years of working with them, know the people in the building department, we know the people involved, and we know what we can and can't ask them or what to do and when. And we've got a plan for it from the beginning. Again, they're part of the team like everyone else. We're making teaming agreements with them, and making them part of the project. When you're building a hospital in a community too, like Chula Vista, there's interest. The city wants it built. They want to be a part of it, and giving them that opportunity can really get you there to the end. So.
Yeah, again, it goes back to the people and having the right, group in mind. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to kind of end with asking each of you if there are any takeaway points that you'd like to embark on, whoever's watching us, and sort of lessons learned, and good, bad, or the ugly, and also if you have any sense of where you think the industry is heading in terms of delivery methods or good practices for ensuring a successful delivery process. I know there's a lot there, but if you guys can embark some experience on us, I think that'd be very helpful. And maybe Amy, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think in kind of thinking about the P3 industry in general, I think and as it does actually apply to really any kind of project model that we've been talking about today. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to our good relationships and trust, respect, and open communication. And I think those things don't just happen. I think that those are things that have to be fostered and part of the part of the team, whether it's part of the private sector team, the client side team, part of our joint team. I think in my experience, I've really realized that really can turn a project from something, can turn regular issues into really bad issues, or it can turn simple things into a really bad thing. So I think from my experience, it's been that has to be part of the project structure, the project governance, as a part of everything that we do day in and day out. I think in those with those factors kind of put in place, we've seen really our projects become really successful in that way.
That sounds great. Mark, how about you? What are your takeaways, or and also in terms of where you think the industry is headed in terms for deliveries and all that?
Yeah, I think what Amy said is so important, that trust doesn't just happen; it has to be fostered. And in the end, that's how these projects get done. Is you have to trust the team around you. There's 400 or 500 people involved in making a project a reality, and it takes everyone to do their part. Where I see the industry heading, we've seen, it doesn't seem as though there's a contract delivery method that is rising, more than another one. We're still seeing a bunch of both. Maybe if there's any growth, we're seeing more in the IPD world, but it's got a long ways to go to catch up to the traditional and the design build type of models. So I think really what we are seeing is that there's a trend to pull all those big interest parties together earlier and earlier. You're not just your architect is your designer representative, but also your engineers, your structural, your MEP, and sometimes even your technology engineers are at the table earlier and earlier on the project. And same with the construction teams pulling in those key trade partners. If your building's got a lot of storefront or glass or something like that, and that's a key component to the project, then we've seen those subcontractors get pulled onto the team earlier and earlier. Drywall guys, mechanical, electrical trades, we're seeing that as a trend. And so I think that's the right trend. Really, Matt alluded to really pushing that authority to the information is kind of the way I see it, but he kind of said it a little differently. But, the idea is that you get those people to the table when it's the right time to make those decisions and enable them to make those decisions because that they're the experts. That's the funny part about the buildings business, and it always will be, is that it takes a lot of expertise to make a building come together.
Yeah.
And you've got to lean on that expertise and bring that forward to the team to make the right decision at the right time, and getting them to the table sooner is what I would see as a trend. And, it's kind of spanning across all of those delivery models.
Yeah, those are all great points. Matt, how about from your on your end?
Well, one thing I like to think of is like a quote, I think it was from Peter Drucker, that said, like, if you can't explain what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And I kind of lean back at that. Like, people will think I'm being crazy. They'll be like, what are you doing? What you're doing is insane. Trust me, like, if we do this, this, and this now, it will lead to this, this, and this later. Everything is a process in the end. And that's how we take the complicated things like building a hospital and make them actually happen in reality. But I would say when it comes to the methodology for how we do it, again, I use a lot of design build. I have nothing against IPD. As an architect, I've been a part of it. We haven't done that contract at Sharp. I just think the more collaborative processes are necessary these days if you're building complicated items. I mean, you can do a traditional bid on a house. That's fine. Like, there's not a lot of complexity there. But when you just think about the technology involved in hospitals today, the huge amounts of regulation and things that we have to do, all the complicated processes that are happening, like behind the scenes in front of your faces, you need to cast a wide net to understand everything you need to understand in order to do what's right in that complicated arena of project delivery. And I just don't know how you could hire an architect and think they know everything they need to know about what's going on and design this thing in a vacuum, and then later bring on the people who are going to build it and who are actually installing mechanical systems and electrical systems and emergency generators. And, there's just too much there for any one person to have enough knowledge to do it the best that it could be done, the most efficiently at the best price. And, what drives the cost up in these things is not work, it's rework. It's, the plan was wrong and we ripped this out and we did this again, or we spent all this time designing it and getting approved, and now it doesn't even work, and we have to do a different design now that we've come here, and I have to spend the time to get that reapproved. And the people who approved it in the first place don't want to spend the time to reapprove it. Like, why? We already approved it that way. Why are you changing it? Right? Like, these are the conversations and fights that will always happen. It will never be solved, but at least it can be diminished. And at least, if we go from doing 50% of the project twice or three times to only 10%, think of the dramatic savings in time and money and in just the planet and all the materials we threw away and energy we wasted. So, we have to rethink how we're doing things. And the more we can be collaborative, the more we're going to do that.
All great points. Again, it's been a pleasure being on the same panel with you guys. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and experience in this field. And I think we're almost out of time. So I again appreciate you guys being here and making me your moderator. And hopefully everybody has some takeaway from what we've discussed today. I think there are a lot of good points to take away, and and some may seem simple, but in practice they can be difficult. But those are the things that, based on your experience at least, will make a project successful. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.